to us today. Give us guidance, wisdom, and how to be good stewards of the resources that you have been that you bestowed upon us. And I ask you to bless this time this morning in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all for coming. So this is Tony has to put a financial seminar together. We do this for the basic kids. So we try to change it a little bit because you've got a lot more life experience in the room. But I'll just give you a little history real quick. One disclaimer: I'm not a financial planner. I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not an accountant. Okay, nor an investment advisor. Okay, I don't have all the answers. So if you want to leave now, that's fine. What I do have is war scars. I do have some self-induced financial stresses, some aggressive financial strategies that I tried to follow through my life that ended in sleepless nights and time-tested strategies that didn't work because I missed the timing. Okay. Past performance is not a guarantee of future result. You see every perspective, and it's absolutely true. You can do the same thing somebody else did 5 years ago, 2 years ago, an hour and a half ago, and you can get a different result because you don't know the parameters. I've been married for 44 years, my lovely wife, Lori. Been involved in church finance for several decades, just by being available, which is a different story. I was COO, CFO, and CPO of a $32 million company. We ran 24/7, 364. We had 400 employees and 100 temps. So I had plenty of opportunity with people with financial issues, regardless of how much money they made. We thank God daily for His grace and His provision, and we'll walk through. I'll give you an outline in a second. Some of the reference points is I use Dave Guzik's commentary. I use this guy called David Bonson, Dave Ramsey, and Crown Ministries were the four main pieces that I use from background. Just so we can set the day up. We kind of broke it into two parts, and there's some goodies in between. So first we'll set the stage, we'll do some terminology, we'll talk about some biblical financial foundations, and then we'll talk about some maybe today's concerns. Like I said, we'll do a little break, and then we'll get into some today's life seasons, and that's anywhere from high school to retirement. Some struggles that we're all going to have in those areas, and then a deeper dive and a better understanding of the financial position that you're in. The first part is you really have to understand where you're at. Okay. So at the end of the day, the deliverable will be, you'll be able to take something and you can prepare a budget. We'll go through that, and plan on how you give, you save, and you spend. So that at a high level. All right. So some of the topics that Tony and I talked about was budgeting, debt management, financial statements, retirement, estate planning, etc. And there's a lot of core principles, biblical principles that we'll review at a high level as we go through this. One is God is the source. We're to store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. We can't serve two masters. But what talents have we been given, and what are we doing with them? Basic stewardship, work, seeking good counsel, save, plan, give, contentment, margin, flexible. And we'll go through some of these. Now, each one of these is a study unto itself. So today we're just going to take a high level from a reference point of what that looks like. One of the things that I run into a lot with the younger generation, and I work with my son Brian, and everybody's 40 years younger than I am. So we're in different spheres of experience, let's say. So one of the first things they come up with is nothing is affordable. Cars aren't affordable, houses aren't affordable. I can't have the same house that my parents have. I can't drive the same car. I can't have the same vacation. I can't have the same experience. And they almost quit before they start. My experience. So we'll walk through some of that. You're giving up a couple hours on a Saturday morning. I want this to be your time as well. So as we go through things, let's make this a little more interactive. We try to do it with the basic students. A lot of times they just didn't have the where to start. So we work more with them on the starting point. So what are some concerns? What are some financial issues, concerns for yourself, your spouse, your kids, your parents? Everybody's got different things that they're concerned about. Anybody have something at the top of mind? I know retirement's an issue as you get closer to retirement, or you pass the retirement age. My father's 90, so we're doing a whole other section of expense on that side of things. Yes?
Well, obviously, we're here in church, but how does this entire topic, the financial, the budgeting, everything, in our relationship with God?
Right.
I hear Tony talk about
Mhm.
being good stewards all the time. So,
Right.
do you have any extra encouragement in
Mhm.
that realm?
And we'll go through some of the biblical principles that we kind of base all this on, right? But if there's anything that you come up with that's specific that we can kind of talk about as a group, I think that might be helpful. The other thing I hear a lot of is, the won'ts. I won't have this, I won't have this, et cetera, et cetera. But on the next sentence, I'll hear that they just bought $350 concert tickets and went to a show this weekend and blew $700. And I'm going like, wait a minute. So it's a priority thing. Tom taught Dave Ramsey course, I guess, a couple of years ago. And in any of these programs, and we'll get into some other things in a second, it's all about your resolution to do it. And it's 95% of it is the one to do, right? All right, New Year's resolutions, right? And here's just a couple on the board that I think everybody talks about. One's financial, one's let's say health and wellness, personal lifestyle, things you want to get done. My physical's usually in December every year, just because it's scheduled that way. So we kind of review did I gain weight, did I lose weight? I never lose weight, but anyway. What's my cholesterol? That type of thing. I was playing with the doctor last time, and I'm overweight according to my BMI. So I said, what do I need to do to get to be not overweight? Lose 20 pounds. Any other options? He said, grow 4 inches. So I said, let's go with that one. So he gives me the stare over the glass of like, come on, you're kidding. But anyway, it's also a good time to look at your finances at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, and say, how'd you do? What'd you do? Are you on plan? You're not on plan. Ran into a kid. He wants to save money. He wants to get married, all this kind of stuff. But then I found out he takes a weekend and goes to the Bahamas. Wait a minute. How did that fit in the priority? Well, it was $1,200. It's cheap. I had to do it. Well, it messes up all your other. You're not serious about your plan if that's what you want to do, right? Okay. Who handles the money? Looking at relationships, men and women, mainly marriages. Is one person handling all the finances and the other person not have a clue? Unfortunately, been to 3 funerals in the last, not that long, couple months, where the person in the casket handled all the money, knew all the passwords, knew where the debt was, knew where they banked. Okay, very sad situation. And we've had a couple actually in the church where one person that's what they were good at and that's what they did, and left quite a mess. Very, very painful experience. So we'll talk about that. My father-in-law was in the ICU a couple months ago in Delaware, and I had to leave the room and go to the waiting room with some other people. So we're down in the waiting room, and this lady comes in on her cell phone screaming, wailing. Her husband had some sort of episode, was unconscious, was in emergency surgery, and she had his phone, and he's getting these texts and voicemails from all their creditors. She had no clue that they owed anybody any money, let alone, she was talking to her son, and there was nowhere to go. I felt bad for him, but she was oblivious to anybody being in the room, and just the stress she was under was just incredible. I felt very, very bad for her. So be informed. Do you know where the checkbook is? Do you know what a checkbook is? Okay, sorry. I'm serious, because a lot of people don't have checkbooks. That's something. Yeah, that's fine. And if you don't have one, you can take one. At least it's a check register. There's no money with it. Do you know how much money you make? Do you know where it comes from? Do you know when it comes in? Do you know when bills are due? Do you know when your insurance bills due? Every 3 months, this thing shows up. I go, oh, because it's not monthly. How many credit cards do you have? It's pretty basic, but you'd be surprised that some people just don't have any real understanding of where that's at. So I encourage you to least sit down and understand it. We'll go through what that process looks like. All right, so here's some basic 101 stuff. I'll try not to make it boring. I'll try to blow it through. It's more from a terminology perspective so that we get an understanding. So the economy is, the process or system by which goods and services are produced, sold, bought in a country or region. Okay, pretty boilerplate. I follow this guy, David Bahnsen, and I think in today's environment, we have to understand, because we're hearing all this, we've come from a capitalist, interpretation of it. Now you're hearing more about socialists. I grew up in the 60s, yes, a long time ago, where you're out of World War II, you had, the Soviet bloc, you had communism, you had all these things, so they kind of told us about that. So the socialist view, this is from David Bahnsen, was that everyone doing the same work and receiving the same wage, that there's a collective ownership, wealth is redistributed, okay, and they strive for economic equality. And that's what it says on the paper. Well, they may just read a book called Animal Farm, which is a spoof on this whole thing, right? All animals are equal across the board, but some animals are more equal than others, okay? And we've traveled quite a bit around, and we've been to Czech Republic, and we've been to Croatia, old third world bloc countries, and this is, a couple years ago. The roots are still there from communism. The roots are still there from having communal properties. John, you've got 5 pieces of property. You can only lay your head, this is a real true story, you can only lay your head on one pillow in one place. So we're going to take the other 4 from you because you don't need that. And we're going to distribute that over here. Okay? They're still fighting over that dispute of property, and the war's been since 45. Okay? So it's a long time, and they're still fighting over who actually owns the property. And then we'll run through some other things from GDP. Hopefully nobody falls asleep here. Unemployment, wage growth, tax rates, and just mentioning some of these things for foundational reasons, because they're in our environment and how they affect us. Okay? So we have inflation. The chart on the left is 2010 to 2025, and the chart on the right goes back to 1920 to 2020. We have inflation. Prices pretty much always go up, right? So what is inflation, and why does it concern me? Anybody have any, thought of that?
When I was a kid, gas was 28 cents a gallon. Now it's $3. That's inflation.
So the year I got my permit, it was 38, so I'm a little younger than you are. 38 cents, okay, for a gallon of gas, right? Now it costs you $50 to fill up. A year later, it was 59 cents. A year later, it was $1.29, okay? So what's a $20, $25 worth in 10 years? At 3%,
Not much.
At 3% inflation, what's this worth? 74 cents. If inflation goes to 5%, what's this worth? 60 cents. So you need 40% more dollars to buy the same things you're buying today. Okay? So the impact of that, and we'll get through some of the, we'll get through some of the examples. Okay, government spending. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. This is government spending. This is government income. I'm a visual guy. Okay? So let's see what the government spent last year. What do you think the government spent last year? $7 trillion. What do you think Uncle Sam collected in taxes? 5.2 trillion. So they spent 34% more than they made. If we did that, we'd be where, Joe? Right? Right. So, and the deficit's over $38 trillion, which the government is paying interest on. I'm not trying to bore anybody, but I'm just saying this is impactful for why we have to save money, because our money is going to be less and less over the period of time. Zimbabwe, $100 trillion bill. $100 trillion. at its lowest point, you wouldn't buy 2 cups of coffee at Wawa. In 2008, it was being devalued 98% a day. Every day you woke up, your money was worth half. As you go through that. Gross national product, and I'm not, again, high level, the United States produces the most as a country, but not per capita. And there's some other economic things that go with that, but just at a high level, we produce a lot, okay? Unemployment. If you look, there's a gray marker around, 2008, and that was the recession. So you had a lot of people that were unemployed. The next spike over was COVID. So if you go back to the Great Depression, if anybody's familiar with that, from 1929, 25% of the country was unemployed, pretty much until 1941, until the start of World War. It was a long time for a quarter of the folks to be unemployed. The financial crisis in 2007, 2008, 10% were unemployed, and COVID took out almost 15% unemployment, just from an event perspective. So you've got the economy, you've got speculation, you've got disease, you've got technology changes. Now you've got, what is AI going to be able to do or not do, and those types of things. Again, just as points of reference. Hourly wages. Jim, what was your first hourly wage?
$2.40 1970.
That was $2. So that's $4,000 a year. Can you imagine? I mean, it's hard to believe. Now, in New Jersey, it's $15.92 an hour, which is about $33,000. The federal government established a minimum wage in 1938 for 25 cents an hour, but you had to work 44 hours a week. Okay, none of this 40-hour stuff. In the late 1960s, you could live on a minimum wage job and have a house, mortgage, and everything paid for, because you didn't have the inflation that we have now. In 1916, California had a minimum wage of 16 cents an hour. Today it's almost $17, and New York and California are pushing for $30 a minimum for minimum wage. It just raises everything. Your hamburger's going to cost $28, okay? Just from an inflation perspective. CPI is basically what the prices go up every year, and it's very few years that prices actually went down, just as a historic reference point. The fund rate, which is monies that the bank gets to borrow. Like I said, my timing was impeccable. Our first house was in '79, our second house was in 1980, so mortgage rate was 10.5, second house was 13.25, third house was 15%. Cost of money was extremely high. But we've had, 7%, 5%, now mortgage is 3%, so it's been, all over the chart, and there's reasons why that is. Rates right now are coming down. Again, just as a reference point. Consumer confidence is how the consumers feel. They feel good. Typically, stable jobs. They're going to spend more money. That's what that looks like. There are some quote unquote recession-proof companies, and if you work for one, keep your job.
How is that gauged? How they feel? Can you interview people?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
like man on the street kind of stuff?
There's some sort of survey that they do,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's more of a. Is everybody gonna? We'll do a survey. You're gonna make major purchases next year. You're gonna go on vacation. How you're spending your money is what they're gonna trend. If you're gonna, if you're feeling bullish, and you're gonna move, you're gonna get a house, you're gonna get furniture, you're gonna travel. They're looking at, okay, that's gonna be a boom to the economy. Oops. Sorry, jumped ahead. So, the stock market has been, last couple of years it's been a great run. And again, Jason's better equipped to talk about the Dow Jones Industrials, but it's kind of what you hear in the news. In 2023, the stock market was up 26%, 37,000 and change. 2024 was up 23%, 42,000 and change was the number. Ending with 2025 was up 17%, so 48,063 was the is where the composite index ended. So just by being in the right index funds at that period of time, your money grew, right? But again, this is over history. You know, there are winners and losers in the market. The other thing is technology changes too. We had a neighbor that owned a whole bunch of Blockbuster video stores, printing money until you don't print money anymore because technology comes and now you're doing it on CDs, you're doing a mail order, now you're doing streaming. Those businesses don't exist anymore. Kodak used to make film. Last time somebody bought a roll of 35 millimeter film and had it developed, it's been a while. They're out of business. It doesn't exist anymore because the thing changed. And there's a variety of different technologies that have kind of come through and taken over. So that's kind of like just a basis point of history. Foundation, we'll talk about foundations. Before you build anything, your life, your marriage, your business, a building, you really need to evaluate what your foundation is, okay? My first job was digging footings. I was 15 years old, and I had no idea how to dig, but I was going to dig for 8 hours a day. I said, how high? 2 feet, 62 feet. Remember the first building, 62 feet by 92 feet, 2 feet wide, until I can't see you. That's pretty deep. So I learned how to dig, right? So foundationally, you know, it's to hold the dead load of the building, which is the weight, the physical structure of the building, the live load, whatever you're doing in it, where you're running forklifts, people, and then the roof load, which would be any elements on the outside. Okay. Again, just for the concept being, you need a good foundation, or it's going to crumble. The building is going to fall. We were in Amsterdam a couple years ago, and they have pictures of Amsterdam upside down, and it's a forest because they built it on reclaimed marshland, similar to the Barrier Islands, let's say in Ocean City. And you've got all pilings in, and it's very, very tight. So there's lots of pilings. So if you turned everything upside down, but that's the foundation, and they drive them down to like bedrock. So that's how you have the stability, because if you build it on sand, it would just be washed away. I was fascinated by the World Trade Towers. You know, when they were building these in the 60s, these are the tallest buildings in the world. They're over a quarter mile high, 1,368 feet. Just the sheer weight of the material was 250,000 tons, and they actually built them on springs because they're so tall, a quarter mile high, and you know, you get the wind of the ocean, they did sway. So it was fascinating to me to watch them build them, and actually I was in the buildings a long time ago, and then in 2001 we had a terrorist attack for planes through them, and they crumbled. I was actually in New York City doing business over that period of time, and was able to walk by the devastation and the holes, and the cleanup, and it was. But the actual buildings themselves had these massive foundations to hold all that. Okay. So what's our foundation? Back to kind of what Chuck was saying. I'm not going to read all the scripture. I'm going to give you some highlights through this. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was in the face of the depth. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Philippians 4, right? And my God shall supply all our needs according to his riches in glory by Jesus Christ. And then Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and all the fullness of the world and those who dwell therein. It's all his, right? God's perspective. It's helpful to seek his will, his way, his guidance, his direction. And the other principle here is that we're to store up treasures in heaven. So Matthew 6, where your treasure is where your heart will also be. And then Luke 12:15 is life does not consist of the abundance of possessions. It does call us to build, and build our life, with an eternal perspective. It also calls us to be transformed in our hearts, our minds, and our lives. Our provision and our ability to earn all comes from God. Two masters. I don't know if anybody's heard this one. You can't serve two masters. Either you hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. I have several references on this. I didn't look them all up myself, but the Bible has over 2,300 references to dealing with possessions of money and things, right? Because our heart a lot of times goes to those things. And money is really basically a tool, and there's always a tension between wealth as a blessing and the reward of hard work, and the warnings against, idolizing it. But at the end of the day, it's really just a tool. It's a great servant, and Tony's mentioned this before, but it's a horrible master. Talents. Your time, your money, your abilities, your authority. What have you been given? What have we all been given? And the parable of the talents found in Matthew 25. In the ancient days, you had servants, you had people that you got responsibility. And I'll paraphrase the story. Owner was leaving, took 3 of his servants, and he gave one 5 talents, one 2 talents, and one 1 talent, and he went off on his business trip with the expectation that they were going to give a return when he came back. So a period of time came back, and 2 of the servants, the guy that had 5 now had 10, the guy had 2 now had 4. He was very well pleased with them. They were well done, good and faithful, servants. And because you've been faithful a little, I'm going to give you more, right? Third servant, not so much. He buried the money, didn't really do anything with it. He could have invested, he could have done something with it, but he didn't do anything with his talent, right? And he was called a wicked and lazy servant, and his money went to the one that had 10. I've used this principle in business, especially with younger kids, right? They come in, they're all anxious, they want to work, they want to own the place. This is your first job, okay? I want you to show up, I want you to lock the door, and I want you to punch in. That's it. Can you do that? You'd be surprised. You'd be dumbfounded. Okay? That's too hard. Okay? They don't show up on time. They forget to lock the door. I got a camera on the door. You can't. You locked it or you didn't lock it, right? You didn't lock the door. So if you're not faithful in the little things, I can't give you any more responsibility. And one kid, after like weeks and weeks and weeks, he had more write-ups than my entire career cumulative. He had more than all of that combined. Okay, we tried to give him a chance. He just didn't get it. So we sat him down, and we write somebody up. We give them what the issue is, what our perspective is, what our recommendation is. We're the employer, right? And kids don't get that either. They think that, I'll get into the work-life balance a little bit later, but they think they deserve more than they deserve. They didn't earn it. So, but if somebody actually can prove that, you can show up on time, you can lock the door, you can punch in. Same kid, didn't punch in for a week. I didn't pay him. So I showed up every day. He didn't punch in. I don't know, just trying to teach him a lesson. It's like, well, that's your responsibility. Sorry. Anyway, unfortunately, he did not get that. But other ones did, and they've taken on much more responsibility, especially when I worked in Philly. You had certain people that just rose to the top, were there, were available, saw it, could take care of it. They got promoted, they got the bonuses, they got to the next level. Okay? Sorry, I think I jumped ahead here. Stewardship. The principles are, we're managers, we're not the owners. Okay? Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, still his. 1 Chronicles 29, all wealth comes from God. The story came to mind, I'll just go through it. My grandparents bought a place in the 70s, and fireman that had it, and he kind of made everything himself, and the kitchen cabinet was plywood doors. He had ripped it himself and painted it, so it looked homemade. So I went to my grandparents and said, all right, for $1,000, I'm going to put brand new cabinets in, new Formica countertops. You know, do the kitchen over, just be done. And my grandfather looks at me and says, why in the world would I spend $1,000 to put $12 worth of dishes? This doesn't make any sense to me. He was just a good steward of what he had, and it didn't make any sense. So how much is a gallon of paint? So I went out and got a gallon of paint, and we painted the kitchen. They lived there 20-some years, and they sold the house with the same kitchen. Okay, but it was just his perspective on it. God calls us to work. Okay, and again, it may not be for a paycheck. So the principle is God blesses hard work, not laziness. Again, just a couple of these scriptures. Proverbs 10:4, lazy hand makes for poverty, but diligent hands brings wealth. 2 Thessalonians, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. Proverbs 14 is, in all labor is profit, but idle chatter leads only to poverty. Work is not an entitlement. You know, you've got to do something to earn it. But the purpose is to provide. I met a man a couple years ago. Father left. Mother didn't speak English. She cleaned houses. So they had 2 kids. They were homeless for 14 years. They lived in the park. They lived in the car. They lived in the basement of a church. They lived all over. He and his brother are the hardest working guys I know. They do anything because they're in such a terrible position, but they learn so much from that they're just, and they're very intelligent people. It just was, dad left and didn't leave him any money and didn't provide for him. But they're just incredible workers. And for stay-at-home moms, you got the hardest job of all. And if the guys don't believe it, give the wife 24 hours and take the kids, and you'll see what happens. My father's one guy, David Bonson. He wrote a book, full time. There's 2.1 million able-bodied folks between 20 and 35 that are just not working. They're just not in the workforce. What are they doing? And here's just an excerpt out of his book. We're created to work, and our work provides unique meaning and purpose to our lives. Yet today we're living in a crisis of apathy and ignorance regarding work's theology and existential nature. Work centers are the intersection of our passions and our skills, providing a venue for acting out God's given capacity and talents for productivity and creativity. Ecclesiastes 5. This is what I've observed to be good. That it is appropriate for a person to eat, drink, and find satisfaction in their toil, labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. And then 5:19. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. So work is not a 4-letter word. I'm going off script here. My first job, I worked in Philly, and they're all World War II vets. Hardest working people, focused. No job was too hard. No deadline was too tough. They just got it done. They banded together. It was a great brotherhood, and it was a great learning model. And if you didn't pull your weight, they took care of you. And boss didn't have to take care of you. They made you pull your own weight in this thing. One of the things that Bonson gets into is the whole work-life balance, and he interviews a lot of people, and we're here to work. Too many people come in that they want 6 weeks vacation. Can I leave at 4 o'clock? I got the second gig I'm doing. It's got to be their primary position. So I won't get too much into that. Sorry. Sorry, I jumped ahead too far. All right, seek godly counsel. The principle is don't handle finances in isolation. Proverbs 13:20, he who walks with the wise man will be wise, but the companion of the fools will be destroyed. Proverbs 15:22, without counsel many plans go awry, but in the multitude of counselors they are established. Concept being, ask and get advice, godly advice. Save your money. Who intentionally saves money? Anybody? Oh, we got a couple. All right, good. All right, so the principle is save wisely and plan, right? Proverbs 6:8 is talking about, the ant and the sluggard. I mean, if you've ever watched an ant, they're very diligent. They really work hard. They're always working, right? They're gathering, they're saving up. Proverbs 13:11, wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished, but he who gathers by labor will increase. My grandfather always told me, save for a rainy day. I'm out there digging footings at 15, 16 years old, and I'm going, save for a rainy day? What's that mean? You get 4 days of rain, you don't get paid, okay? Got it. Bills keep coming, okay? Things keep coming. August, our dishwasher went, our dryer went, and the fan in the refrigerator went. Not an inexpensive month. Not in my budget, not planned. If you save $5 a day, you've saved $1,825 a year. If you save $27.40 a day, you've saved $10,000. Just as a point of reference, savings needs to be intentional. Be generous and give. Sorry. The concept here is give back to God first, and then help others. Proverbs 3:9, honor the Lord with your possessions and the first fruits of your increase. Malachi 3:10, bring all the tithes to the storehouse. And there's some other scriptures there. If you go back to Malachi 3:8, God's basically telling the Israelites that they've been robbing him because they haven't been paying the tithes and offerings. And then in 10, he goes back and says, bring all the tithe to the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and try me now for this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the window of heaven and pour out for all such blessings that there will not be room enough to receive it. The church is the same way. Like I said, I've been on this side of the church finance for probably 3 decades. The church tithes, the church gives to missions. We never talk about it, but the church is a business, and we do have expenses. And your personal giving, you really need to get with God and decide what does that look like. This kind of drives me a little crazy because so much money is being spent on it. There's over $2 billion in advertising on gamble, and again, a lot of the younger kids they're betting, they're making money on the weekends, and they see it as an employment thing. But the sports betting is a $150 billion industry. They're not losing any money. So people aren't really making money through it. The odds are not in their favor. But they are going, this commercial drives me a little crazy too. They're trillionaires. It's all about the experience. It's just, quick rich schemes just don't work, and they're not good financial stewardship. That's all I'll say on that. The other thing is I see a lot of people that are just stressed out in their situation, whatever that looks like. Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, don't be anxious. I think, what's the Bible say? But who's had financial anxiety? I have. I mean, we're in situations that you didn't really plan for, but you're here. Too many bills. One employee says, I just don't have enough month. I get more bills than I have a month. What do I do with that? So anyway, there's a process, and we'll go through that. Matthew 6:25. There I say to you, do not worry about your life and what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body. What will you put on? Is not life more than food, and body more than clothes? Matthew 6:33. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things shall be added to you. And then Matthew 6:34. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself, about other things rather. Sufficient for the day is its own troubles. I think there's good counsel in that. Again, same thing with contentment. Be content with where you are in life and what you have. Philippians 4:12. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And then 1 Timothy 6, just the first part. But goodness and contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world and we take nothing out of it. We went to a dear friend's funeral, I guess a year and a half ago, and the husband got up to speak, and he basically gave these 3 words: be, do, and go. Okay, be who God wants you to be, do what God wants you to do, and go where God wants you to go. And they were the living example of that through their life. Okay, it's when God's talking to Isaiah in Isaiah 6:8. You know, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? You know, here I am, send me, said Isaiah. So that was these folks. They went and they did when it made no sense. They were the ones that were instrumental in this, getting us saved, because it was really kind of how they had their faith and how they lived it, and you know, be, do, and go, and what they actually did. Very dear friends. Margin. Do you have breathing room in your life? A lot of people I know are just running and gunning, and have no extra time for certain things. Margin important. In business, margin is the difference between the price and the cost. Basically, it's your profit, right? If you run a business without margin, you go out of business. Okay. Same thing. Running a life without margin, you burn out. And it's too much stress. To avoid feeling overwhelmed and to handle the unexpected, it's your time, it's your finances, it's your emotions. It's just, so again, the counsel there is to really monitor what you do, and maybe you have to cut back on some of that. Same thing with finance. Be flexible. Okay, life can be hard sometimes, you know, extremely hard, and this too will pass. So back in 1918, there was a Spanish flu pandemic. Not many people know about it. It kind of came up during COVID, but a lot of people died by this flu. My great-grandparents, on my father's side, the husband was one of 13 children. They married and had 3 young children. Both died during the pandemic. There was no government welfare. There was no social services. The family had to just step in and assist. My grandmother actually was orphaned at 6 and lived with her grandparents, an aunt, and then a cousin. Sometimes seasons just suck. But my grandfather he was a deacon at the Chapel by the Sea Church in Ocean City. Their faith was important. My grandmother actually married, had 4 sons, lived a very active life, held possessions very lightly, shared everything. Folks would show up, extra folks would show up for dinner. It was the 12 loaves and fish, man. I don't know how she did. She'd get extra plates, cut everything in half, and it just worked. I don't know. She was very dear to us. She didn't hold on to possessions, and she had a blessed life. She lived till 101. Life happens. The Great Depression. My grandfather on my mother's side was born in 1899. He had to drop out of school and get a job at 12 because the family needed him to work and make money. My grandfather was married, started a business, and then the Great Depression came. The year after that, they had a son, Ray, who lived 5 days and died. And again, it was a rough start. The business was hard. You know, losing a child was hard. You know, everything was uncertain at that point in time. But they did have faith in God, and they had good work ethic, and he was extremely frugal, and he lived till 92. So it was part of their life, but you know, they survived it. During the 73, there was the oil embargo, and that created all kind of chaos, and expenses. There was the 2008 financial crisis. There was bad mortgage bonds, and my neighbor was a mortgage broker, and I knew people at AIG in New York, and it was ugly. A lot of people lost their jobs. 10% of people were laid off. Interest rates were in flux. It was just an unstable time. And then I think the other one that everyone can refer to is the COVID pandemic and the panics that we lived through that, and 15% unemployment. So you need margin, you need savings to kind of get through these types of situations, and I'll get to that in a second. Goals and desires. I don't know. They used to have the JCPenney wish book, and we'd all cut out the pictures and put them on the refrigerator, tape them on the refrigerator, and just a subtle hint. This might be what I want. But today you've got media, you got television, you got streaming. I can go on my phone and I can get Amazon delivered like today. It's pretty instantaneous as far as what you can get. So what's everybody want? Right? From a goal perspective, what are some goals? We have a young kid. He's making settlement on a house in 2 weeks. His first house is a little townhouse. There's some people buying some property, trying to build a house on that. Renovating properties. Some people like cars. Some people don't. Some of the younger generation are just going to Uber. They have a bike. They're not even going to have a car. But I know some people with $800 truck payments, and that's important to them. I know people that have $2,000 starter cars. So that may be a thing. That may not be a thing. Maybe having a nice vacation, going to a nice place, having a vacation home. So it's good to quantify what some of those things are. Maybe mission trips. Anybody have a bucket list thing that's kind of hanging out there that they'd like to do? You do?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I've always wanted to travel across Europe. I've only been to Italy twice.
Okay.
So.
I like Europe because of the history, and I think everybody needs to know the history. So it's kind of cool. I'm sorry. Is there something back there? Good.
Go to Italy.
Going to Italy. All right. Plan it. Lay it out. I think we've been in Europe a couple times, and it's just neat to walk down streets that are 1,000 years old. We were in Croatia, and the building was built in the 300s. They went to this off island to pull all the limestone out. In the 300s. They had to build a boat. How did they get it out of the ground? How did they cut it? And this massive structure. One of the, I didn't see the movie, but Games of Thrones or whatever, this fortress was actually there. It's actually very cool. You're walking on stones from the 200s. It's pretty crazy. We have no idea what old is here, and what repurposing does. So I suggest that you actually make a list of what your goals are. Here's a couple, and again we did this with the basic group. We did a little survey ahead of time just to kind of understand where everybody was, and at that stage of life they're kind of trying to still figure out, do they go to college, what's their next education thing, they want to get a job, they want to get married, what does all that look like? So it's best to have kind of those things you want to shoot for. So when you start coming up with your savings plan, you can actually do that. The other thing that came up quite a bit is I want to start my own business. I want to own my own business. I want to be my own boss. I want to pay myself as much as I want. It doesn't work like that. Okay? I've been doing this a long time. Business goes through cycle. I've been at every point on that cycle, from the starting to closing businesses, from buying and acquiring to selling companies, to my first job was in the type business. Okay, so this is lead type, a certain font. Before you had a computer. Okay, this goes back to Benjamin Franklin. Okay, I'll piss around. And it's laborious. Okay, Helvetica 24-point cap S. You have to pull them, you have to build it, and you go back and forth, letter by letter. Okay, and build the galley. Okay, I was fourth generation printer for an hour and a half until the industry just stopped. Okay, Here you think you're getting something stable, something that's been around for, since Ben Franklin. You think it's gonna go great, and then all of a sudden technology comes and changes. I'll pass this around just to give you an idea. In 1968, one font of Helvetica was $100,000. So it was an art. But technology changed that within a couple quick years. 20% of the businesses the first year go out of business, 50% are out of business by year 5, and 65% are out by year 10. Mostly because of funding, or they didn't anticipate where the market was going. And I bring that up only because everybody's got the ideal of working for themselves. Now, there are, my son Brian just hit 10 years working for himself, so it can work, but it takes a lot of work and being diligent. All right, budget. There's lots of budget concepts, right? There's a 50, 30, 20. I'm not going to bore with everybody with all the details of this, but it looks at your needs, your wants, and your debts. There's zero-based, there's envelope, there's 3 Ps, there's all different ways. You have to just pick one that works for you, okay? I mean, the main principle here is plan and manage your money intentionally, okay? Be diligent with it. That's the main part, okay? So you need a spending plan, okay? And you'll each get a copy of these in the second part. Where's your income? What's your taxes, insurance, giving, savings? The main 4, what they call the wall of the budget, is food, shelter, utilities, and transportation. Okay, you have to start somewhere. Personally, I like. I started this years ago. Is the envelope system. You had an envelope. You wrote on there what it was. You went to ShopRite with $40. You didn't come back with $75 for the stuff. Works every time. Where now, debit cards, credit cards, people just, it doesn't seem that there's intentional with the spending. You can't get in trouble with cash. Like I said, you're going with $40, you're not spending any more than that. Now, did you steal out of one envelope to pay the other envelope? Yeah, you move the cash around, but it was a very good way to do it. All right. Dave Ramsey and Crown Financial are probably 2 of the largest, Christian-based financial reference points. Crown has lots of extensive plans, maps, anything you can think of. And again, we'll show you that in a little bit. And Dave Ramsey has some basic principles that he follows, basically to get people out of debt. I mean, his real high level, his history was he got over leveraged in real estate and went bankrupt and had to start over with 0. Debt drove him out of business. I took a lot of personal debt in when the rates were really high, and that just adds a lot of stress to you. But you're leveraging, assets, and it looks good on paper until it actually doesn't work. So here's some. I've tried to condense some of these and make it a little more timely. So first of all, you have to take financial inventory. Where are you at? Basically a financial statement. Where's your income statement and what's your balance sheet? If you're going to go ask for money from a bank, they're going to want to see that, right? What are your debts? Who do you owe money to? Car payment, house payment, credit cards. What's that look like? Then create a monthly, quarterly, and annual budget. And basically, if you don't have a good handle of that, look through your history of your cash in and out. Like, where'd everything go? Look at your credit card statements, your ATMs, etc. And then track your expenses. Establish an emergency fund. These guys, I think it's out of time, was $1,000. I don't think $1,000 is enough today. I think it's got to be $5,000. Everybody says $5,000, but try to buy anything. You go need tires and brakes, it's going to cost you $1,200. Reduce your expenses. Use Doge. Okay, the way they looked at everything, they're still looking at everything. What do you spend money on across the board? We have some kids at work and they like to eat, and then they're always complaining they don't have any money. So I challenged the kid. I said, "What do you spend on lunch?" I had no idea. You go out every day. $280. $280. That's the food bill for the month. Okay, that's not lunch. Okay. He's the one that's buying the house, so he's quickly seeing that maybe some peanut butter and jellies might be in the future that might be a little more prudent. You need to review all your payments, your credit card statements, and you need to have an emergency fund. And the recommendation is at least 6 months. I don't think 3 months is long enough. 6 months, it's a lot of cash. So if you're making $4,000, you need to really save $24,000. Seems like a lot, but in today's environment, it's not. You need to save for larger purchases. You know, the rule of thumb is to try to put 15% away for retirement. You know, if you can't do that, start somewhere. The other thing that drives me crazy in my work career is the employer always offered a 401k match of 3% of your salary. Can't tell you how many people turned it down. It's free money. You're making $50,000. We're going to give you $1,500 cash, tax-free cash, and put it in your account. And they don't want to save the $1,500 to give the $1,500. Makes no sense to me. So obviously, take advantage of any 401k matches they have. Save for your child's college fund. That's a whole different conversation. College is very expensive and needs to be wisely spent so you don't end up with, because again, some of these kids have you know, as employees, they get $400 and $500 a month loans that they're paying on the school loans for jobs that they're not even doing. You know, the degrees don't match up with what they're being paid. So you really need to kind of seriously consider what that investment is before the kid just goes off to college. And then obviously pay your debt down. You try to pay your home off early. You know, build wealth and give. So that's the kind of the concept of that. Churches are not exempt, sorry. Churches are not exempt from having or needing a budget. We were going to this church. We just kind of moved to Ocean City, and we were there a couple months, and me and this other guy were invited to this breakfast one Saturday morning, and we didn't really know what it was about, but kind of got there, and they were asking this other gentleman and I if we would help help with the church finances. So I asked to see the budget. They didn't have one. I asked some probing questions to know that they've been around for a while. Giving wasn't the problem, but spending was. I said, all right, I'll consider it, but you need to give me all the records so I can go back. They couldn't give me a financial statement. So they gave me access to all the bank records and everything. So I rebuilt them the last couple of years. They had $27 in cash in the bank. We had a rent payment, and we had payroll due. It wasn't a giving issue, it was a spending problem. So me and this other gentleman went back and said, okay, if we're going to help you with this, here's the way we need to do it. Here's the budget. Here's the cash controls. And the good thing is, these are God's resources, and depending upon how you use them, He will bless them if you're being good stewards of them. Unfortunately, they weren't. So once it got turned around, giving increased, God was very faithful in that situation. Your debt. Who has a credit card? Who has 8 credit cards? You'd be amazed. Some people have cashback credit cards, miling credit cards, as long as you pay them off. But how many people carry balances over month? Like American Express, that was easy. You got to pay it every month. Now these other ones, do many people have like carrying balances? You know, I think that's on some of the younger generation that I deal with. I'm kind of dumbfounded at some of the balances that they carry and think nothing of it. You've got a credit score. I won't get deeply into that, but it's a FICO score. There's a couple scores, but this is the FICO one. This kind of tells you what's how they're made up. I was with a realtor yesterday, his customer, and he invests in real estate. He helps a lot of young people. First question is, what's your credit score? Can you get a mortgage? Can you get the money? Because if you've destroyed your credit score, it's going to be problematic. During the Depression, there was remember Popeye, right? Right. So this is Wimpy. So again, it's during the Depression, and Wimpy, he didn't like to work and he didn't like starvation very much. So he would barter for a hamburger, today to be pay back on Tuesday. And it's kind of like the whole credit thing. You know, you have to really understand what that true cost is going to be. The principle here is debt is a form of bondage, used with caution. Proverbs 22:7, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. You know, again, we all, I think, use debt as a tool, but it can't be a burden. Credit cards, I think, have gotten a lot of people in trouble because it's easy to get and it's easy to tap out, and the interest rates are just crazy. If your credit is on the marginal side, I've seen rates over 30%. You'd think it's usury. I think the government came out and said they're going to try to limit it to 10%, but it's a risk issue. What's going to happen is if they limit it to 10, you're not going to have credit because nobody's going to take the risk to do it. You know, but there's $1.2 trillion in credit card debt in the United States right now. The average person is $6,400 in credit card debt, and 25% of the holders are over $10,000 in debt. And if you pay the monthly payments at the high interest rates, you're looking at decades before you pay it back. My son gave me this meme. Dave Ramsey's the financial guy, and he's always about paying your mortgage off and paying your mortgage off. And Trump came out and said, you know, 50-year mortgages. So what do you think? Is a 50-year mortgage a good idea? Is it a bad idea? This is where I kind of disagree with Dave Ramsey. You know, my parents didn't have any money. They couldn't say, here's 10 grand, you know, put money down on a house. We had to go figure it out. In Japan in the 1990s, you know, they had 50 and 100-year mortgages, and because it was multi-generational, because real estate was so expensive, you needed 3 generations to pay for it. Nobody was a fan of it. You need a house, so it worked. So I know it seems like it's a crazy idea, but if you want to get into a piece of real estate, what are your options if you don't do that? I'm a math geek, so do your own math. Okay, don't go by my numbers, but I'm just giving you an example. If you went down and rented an apartment from Mr. Gerwitz or Mr. Trocky or one of his places, you're going to pay at least $2,000 for an apartment. Okay, either here or Hamilton, they've got property all over the place, right? So you're with, let's say it's 3% CPI every year, your rent goes up 3%, right? Let's say you buy a house for $300,000, you're able to come up with the scratch for 10% down, you know, 6% mortgage, you know, $500 a month in taxes. At least your payments about equal to what you'd pay in rent. I know everybody gets freaked out with a 50-year mortgage, but you go like, all right, so at least I'd have something. So what does it look like in cash? So the $2,000 a month with 3% CPI is $275,000 over that period of time that you have paid out in cash, okay, to Mr. Truckee and Mr. Gerwitz. And at the end of the day, you got zero, you got nothing. You're empty boxes and you leave, right? You purchased a house, you have a down payment, you'd have a mortgage, it's comparable in dollars that you're paying, right? Let's even assume that there's price increases on your taxes over the 10 years. At the end, you're going to owe $260,000, but the hope is that your property is appreciated, let's say 3% a year, right? Even if you paid back your $30,000, you've made $100,000 in equity in your home. You rent and got zero, you did this and you made 100. I think it's worth considering. So here's a 30-year mortgage. It's going to cost you about $175 more a month if you can swing the difference. But the difference is you're going to pay more towards the principal than you are the interest. So you're actually going to make closer to $135,000 over that period of time after you paid yourself back your down payment over renting. So it's still worth the consideration. Does that make sense? It's you know, it's math. So I would really ask, you know, that you do the math and the due diligence. Right now, they've got, you know, $10,000 to $15,000 first-time buyer, down payment assistance. They do have some state programs and things like that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you embellish a little bit about, what's the importance of paying off your own home? Like having it paid up?
Yeah, so, I mean, the concept is there, you wanna be debt-free, okay? You don't necessarily want, as we get older, as we get to retirement age, do you want that mortgage that's still gonna be there? The concept is you wanna pay it down because your income is gonna probably be lower, and that's the concept. There's ways you can pay it back early. You can pay additional principal ahead of time. We still have our mortgage, it's 3%. You know, we have a plan to pay it off over a period of time, but it's not pressing because I'm doing some other things on the side. But it's best if you go into retirement where you don't have debt, unless you have enough income where you're paying for. Everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different in that case. But it is recommended to have the least amount of debt, especially when you go into more of a fixed income, you know, type of time. Does that make sense? Everybody's situation is a little bit different. You know, they have reverse mortgages for folks that, you know, you need cash. You've got equity in your home. The problem is you can get upside down in those and actually owe more money. You know, they're a little different, more of a dangerous vehicle. Living wage. So how much do you need, right? All right, in New Jersey, to live here, single adult, what do we think the living wage would be? Yeah. So 55,000. Okay. Married with 2 kids, 1 worker. What's that? 72,000. I'm sorry. Married, no kids, 72,000. Married, 1 worker, two kids, 95. Married with 4 children, 120. So, again, we did an exercise. I brought in $6,000 in cash, laid it on the table with the basic group, and said, all right, find a place to live, you know, modest car, insurance, yada yada. They ran out of money. Okay, it was an interesting exercise because they all had expectations of what things were going to cost and where they were going to live, and that's based on $72,000. It didn't work. So it was an interesting example. All right, so why don't we do this? My wife brought some goodies, and Tom's made some coffee. There's some water in the back. Why don't we take a little 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll get it actually into how we put this to practice.